were speaking about sankharas earlier, and how it's usually translated. Well, how we were translating it in the past was determinations, but you seem to be translating it now as activities.
Activations,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well, see, the problem with it is just, as I said before, you when you look into the suttas, there's often a very practical instructions given by the Buddha, how to calm the sankharas, how to regard them, and so on. But any other way, it just was not. Any other translation, it just wasn't practical enough. How to calm determinations. What? I'll just refrain from determining. But what is it? How am I determining things? I'm not determining anything. Or even more ambiguous formations, mental formations. Well, everything is a mental formation. Everything is a sankhara. Okay, but so what? How do I? So under that same mental level, what do I do? How? Because the suttas talk about it. The Buddha gives examples of calming sankharas. And calming sankhara basically equates with samadhi. So like just practically, I was looking practically into it. How would you convey that which sankharas are? You could just say sankharas, and if a person knows what sankharas are, that's fine. But if somebody is still not familiar, yeah, it is obviously, sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha, sabbe dhamma anatta. So it's an important term, important thing. So how can you make it not so abstract, pretty much? And then just look into what's in common, to whether it's a mental formation, whether it's a determination, whether it's cetana, intention, because that's said, cetanas of sight, sound, smell, taste, touches, that's what sankharas are. The Buddha said that in one of the suttas. So what's in common is that those things are active movements, intentions, directions, pressures. So a form of activity. So activity by body, kaya sankhara, activity of speech, vachi sankhara, activity of the mind, chitta sankhara, or mano sankhara. So it's the activities in the broadest term. Being conscious, it's the fundamental sankhara. That's already a form of activation. Like, wake up, switch your power on, you're aware. So you're not doing anything, but you are active. So that's how fast sankharas go, and that's exactly why sankharas determine vijnana in Paticca as well. Why sankharas are the cause of vijnana to be established. Ignorance is cause to establish sankharas. Sankharas establish vijnana. So it's not just, I'm not doing anything, I'm free from sankharas. See, abstaining from doing is something you're doing. So that's your activity. So you can't escape sankharas by not having them, because you will be doing that, which is an activity on the basis of you being conscious and intentional. So stilling of sankharas is a relative thing. If you think you can just do away with them, well, you are on the level of bodhisattva who thought, how do I find peace? By not doing anything, by removing doing of anything, and in the end he wanted to even stop doing the breathing. And then he said, but this will kill me, but there will be no still supreme freedom. So then he realized it's not about removing the activities, it's about removing the particular aspect of them. Hence, avidya, ignorance of that aspect of activities, is the root of all problems, not the activities, for which you need to still, and that's exactly what gradual training is. Patimokkha is the first. Keeping the virtue, restrained by the virtue, is the first, basically, layer of reducing the activities of the unwholesome kind. Moderate in eating, moderating the activities that you have to do. Not distracting yourself with work, with talk, with company. Again, moderating activities that you don't have to do unless you have to do them. Seclusion. It's just no activities of a distracting kind. But obviously, you still are active in seclusion. You move, you talk. Well, maybe not talk to yourself, something. But you move, you think, you intend, you plan, all of that. But now those activities can become more obvious, more discernible, because you're in seclusion, not distracted by coarser activities. And that's exactly the process of stilling the sankharas. Guarding the sense doors, the ultimate preventing from sort of spilling into the unwholesome domain into the domain of the unwholesome activities. So the whole point there, it's not like, I'll just stop doing everything. It's more like just to see the relationship between wholesome activities and not going into the unwholesome activities, and then fundamentally to see that aspect that you are ignorant of in regard to the activities that will free you from activities and all the suffering. And that aspect is ownership of the activities. The fundamental activity of taking things as mine, taking things as belonging to me. That's also another thing you do. The Buddha called it mamankara, mind making. Ahankara, I'm making. It's not on the level of I choose to make this mine. It's on the level of being conscious towards things as if they are yours. So it's very subtle sankhara, of course. But if you have been practicing the gradual training, it will be the most obvious thing. You take things as mine. That's why you are, not other way around. The activities are there. That's why you have sense of self, not other way around. Usually it's I am, I'm active, I'm inactive. I am, things are mine or not mine if I relinquish them. No. Things are yours, that's already activity. Activities are already there. You're already taking them implicitly as to you, for you. Thus, that's why you have a sense of self. So you don't want to still the activities because the magical peace will happen, will sankhara subside. No, there is no stilling of activities in that sense. Samsara is the fundamental activity of perpetually active wandering on and on and on, and it never ends. Doesn't matter what you do, unless you remove the ownership of those neutral activities that you have discerned on account of withdrawing yourself from every single unwholesome activity on the body, speech and mind. Gradual training. So when that's discerned enough, there is no more sense of I am taking these things up. There is no ahankara, mamankara. There is no avidya in regard to sankhara. So sankharas are gone. So the activities that are left are the activities on account of this conscious body and name and form externally for an arahant. And he knows when that breaks apart, when that exhausts itself, that will be the end of it. Because the ownership is... So the true stilling, the true samadhi is the removal of that sense of self in regard to activities. To remove that taking up his mind. To remove that self-centeredness being put first. And seeing sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha. Thus, self-centeredness of Dhamma is all not self-centered anymore. Sabbe Dhamma anatta. And that's why the first jhana is the basis for that complete uprooting of the sense of self. It's the first basis of the first non-activity. Abiding in non-activity is a synonym for jhana. But then the Buddha said, but when I'm in jhana, when I walk, sit, go to toilet, so there are activities in jhana. So what isn't in jhana? Well, Chula Vedala Sutta says in Majjhima Nikaya, what isn't there? Sister Dhammadina, the nun, she says, the sense of I am is not there. One who is in first jhana does not think, I am in the first jhana. I enter the first jhana, I exit the first jhana, I shall be this long. There is no sense of I am. There is no ahankara being pre-made that's now there being self-centered. It's just sankharas that from that point of view of ownership are thoroughly left alone, inactive. And she said, she also answered in the same question, she said, it's because one's mind has been developed beforehand through stilling of that taking things as mine on the basis of complete virtue and gradual training and withdrawal and seclusion. The mind enters, or the mind basically abides in a state of not taking things as I am, even on the level of thought. So you have thinking and pondering purified from ownership.
Well, then you start seeing that impersonal, the body as an impersonal
That
thing.
is already exactly the experience of, in the first jhana, everything is impersonal, top to bottom, whatever you look. That's why the Buddha did encourage. He said that the basis for arahantship is the first jhana or higher in the Anguttara Sutta, and then he said, how is it so? Well, for a monk who is in the first jhana, if he then regards everything in that first jhana as perilous, as dat, everything that's very wholesome, everything not taken itself, regard it in a way that it's not wanted, then his consciousness completely turns away from any basis, and that's a complete freedom. But you won't be able to so purely regard things, see them in their nature as that, as not worth having, if you're still self-centered, if there is still conceit, basically if you're not in the first jhana. So first jhana, walking, standing, laying down, eating, going to the toilet, seclusion, active, very active, yet completely abiding in non-activity of taking things as mine. So it's also completely opposite of any notion of, because see, people do have this recognition of stilling the sankharas. You know, people read the suttas. There's that sutta that says, how do you still them? Well, imagine you're walking, you ask yourself, why am I walking so fast? Let me slow down. Why don't I stand? Why don't I sit down? Why don't I lay down? So there is this whole kind of pretty much infinite layers of how much you still the activities, but not as a goal in itself, and not as something that will lead you then to a magical revelation of the goal. You won't find that in the suttas. But most people's techniques and meditation practices are exactly that. Activities that they do with an underlying view that this will result. Give me the result. And that's the fundamental principle of the activity of sensuality. I work, I earn, I protect, I gain, I enjoy, I engage, and I get pleasure as a reward. And there's a sutta where it says, what is the danger? Well, different suttas were talking about the danger of sensuality, what it is. But in this particular one, it says the danger of sensuality is here a man recognizes, oh, because I'm attached and dependent on the pleasure of the senses, you know, pleasure of having wife, kids, everything else, I am burdened. I am basically, I suffer under the pressure of duty for work, earning, protecting, worrying, providing. All those duties are now not optional for you because of your dependence on the pleasure that you get on account of the senses that requires your engagement on all this high level of providing, worrying, constantly moving to be there. Because if you slow down, these things will go away and then immense suffering will happen because your mind is dependent on it. So he realizes the danger of depending on the sensuality is all the pressure, the work, the burden of all these activities that become unavoidable then. The only way to avoid them is to remove your dependence on the pleasure. And that's exactly why you have to have been withdrawn from that type of dependence for a long time before you can even start approaching the first jhana in that true impersonal sense, seeing these activities on the level that they should be seen. And these neutral activities I'm talking about, it's exactly what we've been talking about, just in different terms in all these talks. You know, like finding an impersonal anchor, the body there, underneath your currently emotionally engaged activity, or this or that, worry, hindrances, whatever else. All of that is constantly undermined and underlined by the physicality of the body, you know. Oh, I'm so worried and I'm thinking about it. But look, all these activities the body is doing that I'm completely unaware of, or if I'm aware of it, I'm putting it second. I'm putting my worry first. I am first. What concerns me is first. This is second. This is irrelevant. Why would I? Then people sometimes might recognize, oh, actually no, be mindful of the body is how you calm your mind. But then they take that mindfulness in that directly active I am doing the mindfulness of the body sense, which means that will now be undermined and underlined by the actual peripheral physicality of the body,
which they're not seeing anymore.
Which they're not seeing because now they make it a thing of I am, mine, doing this is important for me. And that's where your meditation, practice, mindfulness, whatever else is just mechanical observances. That's the only way to see it is, as we've been saying many times, is peripherally. So whatever's there, you're engaged with your sense of self, with your sense of ownership. Peripheral to that, you discern the body, you know, emitting sounds, noises, sweating, tired, laying, positions, all these activities. Reviewing the organs, the Buddha encourages, it's the same purpose. It's not a medical examination or some, again, mystical release. No. Peripherally see that while you're so deeply concerned about something or related, there is the fleshy beating heart, skin, nose, enduring there in this lump, a sack.
Yeah, behind everything.
Yeah,
behind
filled
you.
with various types of beings, like the simile. Oh, these types of beings, that types of beings. Behind everything, moving, living on its own, not even aware that there is you, such and such, there, concerned about things. And whatever you might be concerned or go for or reject or rejoice in is second to the physicality of a, you know, living, operating body subject to elements and everything else. It's second to it. Doesn't matter how self-important you are, it's second to the physicality of that sack of skin. it cannot be otherwise. And if you stop and think about it, you realize. But the reason why people don't understand it is because when they stop and think about it, they overdo it. They make it into a thing. They don't see it on the right level, which is peripheral level, which is where the level of mindfulness is.
Impersonal activity happening in
Exactly,
the
impersonal activity. Activities that have no ahankara and mamankara in level of activation are there, but you don't see the connection because you are self-centered, and those are the activities that matter to you. So whether you do your anapanasati or satipatthana, doing it, while peripherally, there are all these impersonal activities. They could serve as a perfect anchor for complete removal of ownership and complete vijja of sankhara, which would then remove the dependence of consciousness on the level of activity, and it would free you from suffering. And that's why people depend on activities. That's why people are afraid of solitude and inactivity and so on. Because the consciousness depends on a certain level of engagement. Engagement, another form of activity, another form of sankhara. So you want to find the impersonal activities that are occurring all the time, regardless of your mental state, hindrance, your intentions.
feelings, just feeling.
Well, exactly. See, in and out breathing is activity of the body. Neutral activity of the body. It's an activity. But activity, as the Buddha said, it does not tire you out and does not bring unwholesome things to increase. It actually makes them decrease. But it's an activity of the body. So you can engage with it, so to learn how to see it peripherally. As I said before, you find your breath underneath, so to speak. Thinking and pondering is the activity. Vachi sankhara, the activity of the speech. It's impossible to speak unless thinking and pondering is active. It's just inconceivable. And fundamentally, feeling, perception, coming and going, arising on its own, are the activities of the heart, of chitta. That's what defines chitta. Chitta is the activities of that kind. So you remove ignorance, ownership of feelings and perceptions in the broadest sense, your chitta basically has been freed. So the activities cannot cause you suffering. That's why presence of activity means presence of dukkha. Sabbe, sankhara, dukkha. Doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter how defined sankhara.
But the activity of
the activity. Well, yeah, exactly.
Mind
But
making.
for somebody who is not free from I-making and mind-making, every activity implies I-making and mind-making, because that's the fundamental activity based on avijja. You remove avijja, you remove I-making and mind-making activity from the mind, then you can't say activity is there. That's why the Buddha, from Putujana's point of view, Arahant sankharas have ceased. Because for Putujana's point of view, there is no other type of sankhara that is not rooted in ahankara and mamankara.
Doing so.
If it were, exactly, he would be at least a sotapanna. But yes, Arahant still talks, walks, perceives, does things by body, by speech, by mind. Yet there are no sankharas. So relatively speaking, there are no sankharas. So yes, that's why I was considering translating sankharas as activities. Activity / activation is supposed, but you do want to have that emphasis on that. It's not a random activity of a rolling stone or something. It's the activities that are based on intentional action, because intention is another form of activity. It's the fundamental activity, practically speaking. Every consciousness is intentional. It's not a separate thing. And when the Buddha said, what are the determinations? He said it's the intentions of sight, sound. What is the aggregate of determinations? He said it's the intentions of sight, sound, smell, taste, touches. That's the aggregate of activities. That's the aggregate of sankharas. That's the aggregate of determinations, whatever we translate it. So sankharas are the intentions of sight, sound, smell, taste, touches. The activations of sight, sound, smell, taste, touches.
The intentions of your senses.
Sorry? Well, they are actually the intentions of your senses. But for a mind that's not free from avijja, mind-making, I-making is what's first. Which means even when these intentions come, you having not created them, they are yours. And that's why people are, by default, moved by what they see, hear, smell, taste, touch.
Yeah, again,
And immediately assume the ownership and immediately assume engagement. So that's why, again, the gradual training, withdrawal from that, you still have I-making and mind-making and so on, but you are withdrawing from that automatic kind of assumption and action out of assumed ownership towards sight, sound, smell, taste, touches. so that you get to see then, if you're withdrawn sufficiently enough, you get to see that I'm making and mind making as that's the stop doing that. Everything else is fine. Can be left alone like a tree stump killed at the root.
You start seeing the creature.
You start seeing creature, exactly. And that's what that nun said to Mara, wasn't she? When he was talking about, what are you doing? It's like, who are you talking, who are you referring to? There is only sankharas manifesting and enduring, basically. In other words, she's not even seeing any of these activities even as a coarser form of self. So there's like probably some traces of conceit. She must have been anagami or very close to arahantship. So there's just sankharas coming and going. Just activities manifesting and then new activities manifesting and so on. But it's important to not fall into a view. Well, it's important actually to step outside of the view, because most people abide in that view, whereby you think that, okay, so I just stop everything and that's how I stop. That's another activity. Choosing to abstain from choice, choosing to not intend this or that, is what you're intending right there and then. Abstaining from these particular choices is my choice. So that's why there is no, you can't remove the sankharas, as in to make them not be there, and you cannot possibly act your way out of action. So the karma, good karma, bad karma, sure, but karma is always going to be there, unless you remove that ownership on the fundamental level of intention and consciousness and your thought.
You can't decide.
You can't decide that, because that's a very, very strong, very coarse form of activity. Like something's moving really fast. Like, I don't know, get this. So my hands are very active. Okay. So now I still the movement, but this is now my activity. Yes, so it's a relative stillness in regards to doing this with these leaves. Relative stillness, but it's still an activity, because if I stop holding onto the leaf, it's going to start moving again. So don't have the view to expect that you just rigidly stop everything and that's how you enter the peace of non-activity, because that's going to be your activity. And whoever committed to those intense sort of focusing, controlling meditation techniques, well, if they're self-honest, they would see that initially they got the peace from that relative stilling, and after a while all they were getting is frustration and trying to get that peace back, and they were getting more wound up and more intense. And I know from my own experience. When I was still a layman, you try everything, you don't know what's right or wrong, and you start doing this technique, and then you 2 days, 3 days, and then just, the peace is gone, because now this is your reality. Stop everything, I will move slowly, I will not speak, I will never speak, I will never look at anything. And that becomes very active thing that you're engaged with, so there's no peace. So the peace is true peace of stilling sankharas, is the peace of removing the ownership. So the true peace of meditation that stills the sankharas correctly is the removal of the ownership of sankharas, not removal of sankharas. That's why for the correct meditation you need the right view. You need to understand where the problem is. The ownership. You can't just do it, because you're doing it with ahankara and mamankara.